Good evening, everyone. Welcome to IMG Research Academy. IMG Research Academy is an online research academy fully registered in Florida, where we bring like minds, medical professionals, scientists to understand the process of clinical research and discuss it, own it, know it, and then apply it in the society that we live. We also do other things in our IMG Research Academy. We collaborate together to offer research services to people, corporate organizations, researchers. We are also doing our own private researches on different therapeutic areas, on cardiovascular, psychiatry, lifestyle modification, name it. We're over 400 in number. And from different areas of the world, in Canada, in US, in UK, everyone coming together to figure out how we can help our society in terms of research. We have academic calendars. Often now and then, we come together every 2 Saturdays or 2 Sundays to discuss clinical research. And then we go to the basics. How can we understand this better? How can we become better in this thing that we do every day, and how can we use it to either grow in our career or also grow the society at large. Today is series 3 in our 2023-2024 session, and we have an experienced person here, Dr. Quinn, who's based in Canada. Will be walking us through literature review, the A to Z of literature review, and then we'll open it up to general comments, suggestions, and other people. In our midst, I usually like to announce them. We have board of trustees in this group, people who we formed it together and then we're growing together. Dr. Endurance is one of them, Dr. Shitu is there, and every other person, Dr. Henry is just joining us. And they are very experienced, they wade into anything that is great and then clarify it. Together as a group, we've published over 200 papers, 200 projects, and individually on our own, we're doing a lot of things, publishing, working, projects that are going on, quality improvement projects, and here and there. Other services that we offer is we do EB2 support services and writing services. We also help people with their resumes, help them with research training, research understanding, a lot of things. We're a growing community, and someday we're going to get there. Having said that, we'll jump into the topic of the day, but before we jump into the topic of the day, I would like to especially make this announcement that we lost a member of us, Dr. Ade, who has been a founding member, very supportive member, and that's why I'm wearing black. He was very dear to me and dear to the group. He has helped in thousands or hundreds of support in so many ways. Anytime you're missing an item, hey, Dr. Ade, can you help me peer review this paper? Hey, Dr. Ade, can you help this person with this project? Hey, I want to add it to this subgroup. Can you help him? He's written over 60 scientific papers and counting. He was a postdoc fellow in Mayo. Just got into residency, and somehow, the hands of death decided to cut it short. So we as a group want to dedicate 1 second of silence or 1 minute of silence, and we pray that his soul rest in peace. May his gentle soul rest in peace. Amen.
Amen.
We'll move into the topic of today. While we're still in the morning mood, Dr. Quinn, tell us. It's a lot of things to talk about in literature review. We're not going to cover everything. What do you want to tell us?
Okay, first of all, thank you, Dr. Edward, for this opportunity, and thank you, everyone here. Thank you, for Dr. Endurance, for coming. I'm also here to learn from everyone's wealth of knowledge while sharing the little I know. So I will just share the brief slide I prepared just to guide us through our discussion for today. So I will be using this slide. Sorry, my screen is dancing around. I don't know. Okay. Can you see my screen very well?
Yeah, we could see your screen. And we know that in technology, things happen, so no worries.
Yeah, okay. I will just leave it this way for now because there are some other tabs I could use later as we speak. I'll just take this one down here. Okay. So today we'll just have a general discussion on review papers and discuss some specific type of review papers while touching on literature review, for example. And the goal today is to demystify review articles. Like we say in IMG research, we try to demystify research and then summarize types of review papers that we can do. We'll be using this outline, introducing review papers generally, touch some specific review papers, show some examples, conclude, and then we're out of here. So when we say review papers, I'm just wondering what comes to our mind. You can put your thoughts in the chat. We want to try and make this as interactive as possible. But what I have here in the slide is that review papers has to do with basically secondary knowledge, something that has been published before on a particular research topic, and someone is coming to analyze it, evaluate what's there, and you're looking for things like what we know about current knowledge, exploring that. You're also looking for the present state of things. You're looking for gaps in the research papers that you're looking at when you're writing a review article. And you're putting all these together to draw conclusions that would either pave way for future research, draw recommendations for either future research or solutions to the problems that you might have identified that are existing in these research papers. So before starting a review article, there are some things to consider. So we have these questions: why, how, and when. Does anyone have an idea why we write review papers?
I would say probably you want to take a look at trends or patterns in the past, or you want to look at reasons why some conclusions were drawn. That's from my perspective. But other people may have something different.
Yeah, that's true. Looking at patterns, trends, current issues. You can feel free to unmute yourself and speak. It's an open house.
Good evening, everybody. I think one of the reasons also, in addition to what Dr. Ed had said, will be to update, kind of give a more updated review. So for example, if you're talking about patients that have heart failure, and now we have other therapeutics that we can add, like Barostim, like cord therapy. Now you want to do an updated review. You want to add the most recent evidence. And so one of the reasons why we do a review is to go back into the past, look at the patterns in the past, record the past, and then talk about the most advanced achievements we have now, kind of going over it like a glance while focusing on the most recent development in that field.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, with one of the whys, patterns, trends, and like Dr. Endurance added, updating the current body of knowledge with evidence that we can see right now and making sure that the updated information is available out there. Does anyone have anything else they would like to add? Something we are missing out? Okay. So another thing I would just like to point out here about the why is that you really need to consider what you want to do before commenting on a review article and generally any research. So for example, you need to realize that there is a research problem, that you want to formulate a research question on. So that would be your why for the research article. Like, I have identified that there is this gap I've identified that there is this evidence that no one knows about, and I want to update this information. And then you formulate your research question based on that problem that you have identified. The next thing will be the how. How do you want to go about this? Do you want to do an original paper where you want to start from scratch, you want to do surveys, or in the context of what we're discussing today, you want to do a review article to explore the knowledge that has been available and then bring all this information together to make sure that the audience out there are updated on this current evidence or knowledge. And then the when do you want to do this? You figured out the problem you want to solve, you figured out how you want to do it. And then the next thing is when. This is talking about timeline. You need to have a timeline for what you want to do, and then use that to pace yourself to make sure that you accomplish the objective of your research. We'll be moving on to types of research articles. Some authorities say that there are two types of research articles, the narrative and then the systematic review. Others say that there are three types, the narrative articles, the scoping review, and then the systematic review and meta-analysis. So just to make the context of things clearer, we'll be discussing the three types of review articles. Starting with the narrative review, this is also known as literature review. Here, we are just summarizing studies that are related to a particular research topic. And then, like we've said earlier, you are identifying these gaps, you're trying to bring out information and evidence that you can update, as well as you're looking for findings that you can reinforce based on the conclusions you draw from this paper. It's called narrative because you're basically putting all this together to tell a story. You're telling a story. This thing started here, it's going here, this is where we are, and this is what we can do to move forward, or what are the next steps from here. And then you only want to include studies that are relevant to your research topic. You cannot be working on, say, for example, something about maternal mortality or maternal health, and then you're talking about prostate cancer, for example. You're seeing articles on prostate cancer. They might be related, but you have to be sure that it's completely relevant to the research topic you're working on. And then you connect all this back to your research to make sense. Please feel free to put in your questions in the chat box or stop me at any point. We have lots of people here with experience that will answer the questions. We'll be moving on to scoping review. Okay, some authorities also put scoping review together with systematic review. However, there are just some slight differences. It is important to note here that the scoping review could be a preliminary step to a systematic review. Here, a scoping review is, the approach is what kind of makes it a bit different. It's systematic and it's kind of iterative, because you might go to a step and realize you need to do something and go back, just to be able to make sure that what you're doing is specific. A scoping review is more specific on what you are looking for. And then it's useful when you're looking for evolving issues. Again, like every other literature review, you want to bridge knowledge gaps. Usually requires an expert on a subject. However, you need to identify some key things, like you need to have your research question before you start. Here, you might need to consult maybe librarians or people that have knowledge in that area that could help you with access to studies that would be useful to you or relevant to your research. And then your inclusion and exclusion criteria come in here. You need to know studies you want to include. Okay, I'm working on this research topic. What studies will be useful to me here? And if I find papers on this aspect of the topic, would they be useful to me or not? And then you start formulating your inclusion and exclusion criteria for your research. Some tools like Covidence can help in not just scoping review, even systematic review, to help you remove duplicates when you do your search, and to also help with abstract to papers that will be very relevant to your studies. And then the next step in the scoping review will be to extract your data from all the sources you've pulled together and then collate your results. The next type of review we're talking about is the systematic review. The systematic review describes a specific research method. What this means is that you are doing something through a specific method, is systematic. There are protocols to follow, and you have to follow that protocol to arrive at a particular result. And that result should be reproducible because you are doing something that is following a guideline. If someone else is looking at your research and say, you say this is the method you used to do this thing, they should be able to follow that same method and get the same results that you got. There are several methods for doing a systematic review. We have the Prisma, for example, that has about a 27-item checklist. We won't be going into that today. And then there's a Croquet systematic review where you can find more information on that through the online handbook for Croquet systematic review. I just want to also point out here that some authorities kind of put systematic review and meta-analysis together. Again, there is just a slight difference in this thing, between systematic review and meta-analysis. While they both are systematic and they are trying to answer specific questions to your research, a meta-analysis is the statistical process that you use to analyze and combine these results. However, the studies you are combining have to be able to be combined. I don't know if that makes sense. And they should have like similar objectives. They can be several studies. Let's say, for example, you want to do a systematic review on infant mortality, for example, in the US. However, you found that there are many published materials on these, but they are not aligning to your research goal, or they are not going to answer your research questions, but you found two. Those two papers can form your meta-analysis. However, you have to go through the process, the systematic process of showing how you screened out those papers that did not meet it. But for a systematic review, you can be able to use as many papers as possible to be able to arrive at a logical conclusion. You still need to have an inclusion and exclusion criteria to, what's the word now, for your systematic review. I don't know if that makes any sense. Okay, so this is an example of the Prisma flow diagram for the systematic review. The picture might not be so clear enough, but here, for systematic review, for example, there is a flow diagram when you use only the database and register, or registers rather, and that's the figure here on the left-hand side. You have to follow each of these processes, and anyone else that looks at your methodology that you use a Prisma flow diagram should be able to arrive at the same results that you arrived just following through this process. If you use secondary sources, for example, what is called gray literature, you didn't only use the data from databases or registrars. Let's say you needed to get more information from let's say an association that is relevant to, because they had papers there, but the papers were not in the database, they will fall under your gray literature. And then you have to also put in here, go through inclusion and exclusion criteria again, screen them out, and then arrive at this result. So anyone who is looking at your work from a bird's eye view should be able to look at this and understand what you did and how you arrived at your results. Please feel free to ask any questions or stop us at any point. Does someone have a question? Okay. Just to throw more lights between the systematic and scoping review, the most important thing here that would most likely be the differences is that a scoping review might, focus more on a certain topic, but like we mentioned earlier, it's a preliminary step to a systematic review. While your systematic review is more encompassing, you are looking for gaps, exploring those gaps, and you are, identifying conflicting results and putting everything together to draw on conclusion. However, remember that generally, review articles will always want to explore current knowledge. They want to identify gaps in current knowledge and draw conclusions from those, update information, like we have said, looking at patterns and trends. So I would just try to show some. So go ahead, please.
Yeah, let me draw you back. So let's go back to that scoping review, systematic review, the difference between both of them.
Okay.
In reality, let's say we want to talk to a 5-year-old child, because sometimes when you want to, one of the recommendations in the American Academy of Family Physicians is when you want to explain something, to explain it to a 5th grade level, not a 5-year-old child. Let's say, but I know that many of us here are physicians and scientists, but let's say we want to explain it to a 50-year-old level. The way I see scoping review is like, I have something in mind. I'm just going to a database. A database could be an internet, for example, my browser. And I want to talk about, let's say, mortality trends in cardiovascular system. Right, that's a paper, that's a project I want to write. I want to see what is the trend, what is obtainable currently in terms of what cardiovascular aspect is killing more people, what type of people is it affecting the most, right? So I just go to the internet and I just type mortalities in cardiovascular system. So what I'm actually doing, I'm scoping. Like I'm just scoping. I'm not using a system. I just go and say, hey, let's see how it affects the black cardiovascular death in blacks. And then a result will pop out. I will read it. I'll make a summary, and then I'll say, okay, what next do I want to do? So it's just like random browsing in terms of a 5th grader level. The difference between that and that for a systematic review is that before I begin my scoping activity, or before I begin my search in the database, which there are different types of database. I just give an example like Google. There are other types of databases like Cochrane, like PubMed, like my library, for example. It could just be a library by downtown Homestead or downtown Miami library. And I want to look at books on the shelf to see what topics we'll get. In a systematic review, the way I see it is you have a system set first. For me to arrive at the papers that I want to include in this, my research, I want to eliminate A, B, C. I want to include A, B, C. So I have a criteria. And then I set that my criteria fixed, it doesn't change. And then I go for my search and I use some keywords or whatever I know you're going to get there, but I'm just trying to echo it in a 5th grader's voice. That's how I feel. But Dr. Payne, tell me, am I far from the truth?
No, you're not far from the truth. The only thing I'm just going to add is that some people, there's some published papers you might see online for a scoping review. Like you said, it's just going online and doing a preliminary search. It's just, if it's something that they are going to maybe publish, they may just put in 1 or 2 things. For example, the mortality in the US, that you've already used some keywords there, mortality US. So papers that are based on mortality in the US would pop out for you. That's just what I'm going to add there.
Carry on. So tell us more. We're enjoying this conversation.
Okay, so we'll just look at examples for a literature review, for example. Here, this is not a medical science paper. So I found some of these examples online. Here, this person has written a literature review paper, and they did their example and then started on their literature review here. What they did was, from the sources they've gathered together, they found a common theme, and then they grouped these sources under a common theme so that the reader will be able to flow with their thought process and understand what they are talking about. However, this paper is narrative, as we said. It's telling a story, and it wants us to buy into this story. It wants us to follow their thought process, to see their opinions, and then at the end of the day, they draw conclusions on what they got. They drew an inference from what they found out from this study, and then also mention some things that they would like to do moving forward from the conclusion they've gotten. That's just what a literature review is. So you can write a topic on anything, gather relevant literature, and tell a story. And in the story, you are using these things, like we said, oh, what do we know about this topic right now? What is missing from what we know? And then what can we do next? What's the way forward? And what do we need to be updated on? What evidence is available now that people should know about? That's what you do generally in a literature review paper like this. The second example I will give is a scoping review. This scoping review is a bit complex for a 5-year-old, but I will just try to break it down. Some people some authorities say that scoping review has a methodology on its own, but like we said, it's the same. It's like the starting or stepping stone to a systematic review. In this paper here, they created a special section for their methodology, and they did a literature search. Like Dr. Eddie said, just go on Google Scholar and put in abstract for paper on mortality, causes of mortality in the US. And then they got all these, including databases, Gray literature. You can see that they didn't create a specific diagram, that they did it in a systematic way. And that's why it's different from a systematic literature review. But they let us know that this is what they did and how they did it. They still had some inclusion and exclusion criteria and some of the things that they used. Okay, and then they were able to put all their results together. They let us know what kind of publications they use and how they classify those publications for their paper. They drew on conclusions and I think some recommendations and references. Okay, then the final example here is a systematic review paper. How a systematic review paper should look like or should go. We mentioned earlier, remember, from that picture, that it's, if you are not using Gray literature, that's secondary sources, you're only using database and registrar, you use the first, just so that we're on the same page, this first chart. And then if you're having Gray literature that you're including, then you have to include this to this chart to be able to arrive at your final studies that were used for your paper. And an example is this paper. Dr. Eddie, I'm not trying to do anything, but I just found it online too. I just did a scoping on systematic review.
You are trying to put us on the spot to scrutiny.
I just found it online through a systematic scoping
You're
review
trying to
on
put us
Google.
on the spot. I love scrutiny, but it's okay. I feel happy that we're being referenced in this scientific conversation.
Yeah.
In IMG Research Academy, we've really done a lot as a group. Thanks to everybody who put in efforts to this. This is one of our hundreds of work, probably written, I don't know when, 2000.
2022.
Oh, 2022, okay.
About a year ago now.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So here they introduced the paper, talked about the background, what we know about it. Then they let us know the objective, what they wanted to do. The goal here was to identify factors that play a role in developing resilience in adolescents with a co-occurring diagnosis of autism and ADHD. And they let us know that this has never been done before. So it was clear from this paper that their objective was that they have already found out a gap. And then they wanted to now bridge this gap that they have found. They wanted to give us updated knowledge, and they wanted to also let us know what knowledge is available or has been available. So it's also like a storytelling, but it's more comprehensive and more systematic in the way it was done. And then here, they use the prisma that we talked about, I feel like the Prisma is like the easiest way to do a systematic review compared to the Croquin. And the Croquin, for example, I'm trying not to dwell on it because it's a whole lot of process on its own. For you to do a Croquin review, you have to contact the Croquin publishers. They have to approve of your paper before you can go ahead. And then it has to be systematic in their own way. They have their own level of evidence, the way you gather it and all of that. So once again, if you would like to know more about the Croquin review, you can find the online handbook. But yeah, many people use the Prisma because it's quite easy and very, very reproducible. So here we can see that the researchers here
not to jump into what you're saying. So part of the things that we encourage in this group is for people to start with low-hanging fruits.
Yeah.
I don't mean we should make research look very watered, right? But for a newbie beginner, we encourage you to start from the simple things that you can afford, and then you grow from them. So people like us, people like Endurance, people like Henry, we're now working our realm into the Cochrane review, trying to, register some of our presence there. But we started from here.
Yeah.
And once you're comfortable with reading A, B, C, D, then you can grow and then begin to go into the professorial level. So for those that are joining us recently or newly joining the research realm or trying to figure out how to get a paper out, just start from this very easy, very, very low hanging fruit like the Prisma process, and then go from there.
Okay, thank you. But if you ask me, I don't even think the Prisma is kind of low hanging. It's something that when you do it, you should be proud of yourself that you did it. But I don't think it's low hanging. And it's methodological as it goes anyway. So with
Yeah,
this,
I agree because we're on record. I will retract my term. Just start with this one that probably looks as if it's easier.
yeah.
Or probably looks so it's not low hanging. The Prisma process has been tested and tried and reliable over the years in the scientific world. So it's not low hanging, but it from my experience, it has less twists and turns
Yeah.
in administrative process compared to the other ones. But it's not low hanging. I stand to correct myself.
Okay. So yes, does anybody have any questions from this diagram concerning the Prisma in particular? It's kind of straightforward, like Dr. Eddie said. And then if you use any tools, it's very easy. You just put in whatever, like you don't even have to say what tools you use. You just need to say, okay, the tools helped you to remove so amount of paper for so amount of reason. And then let's say you accessed the PubMed database, for example, and there were some records you were not able to access. You just put in here that, oh, I wasn't able to access these papers. Maybe they popped up in your search, but you couldn't get the full text article, stuff like that. So you have to put them under inaccessible records. And then if you had duplicate records, like we mentioned, Covidenx, for example, it's a tool that could help you to remove duplicate records. Some people also use referencing tools like Zotero. It could also help you to remove duplicate records. Okay, moving forward on a systematic review paper, here, they clearly stated the inclusion and exclusion criteria that was used for their paper. Okay, go ahead, please.
Hello. So my question is from the last slide. The difference between records and reports, and I think the third one. Do you mind going back?
To the slides? Sure.
Yeah. Oh, from the last one, from the Prisma flow diagram.
Oh, I see. Here?
Yeah. So, oh no, but down.
This picture?
What's the difference between like the records, reports, and study? Is it?
Okay, that's
because it says record identified from PubMed, Google Scholar, Medicine.
Yeah.
Then under like in the screening, it says reports sought for retrieval. So how do we know what's records and what's reports? Is it the same thing they're talking about, or is it different?
Okay, so in this context, records and reports are basically the same thing. Reports are the papers that you saw. records are still the papers that you saw that have been published, but they were maybe they've been indexed, for example, because most of the papers you get from these databases are papers that have been indexed and they'll be counted as records. But I believe they are both the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Good,
Okay.
great question. So we're just trying to throw in diversity of words, but they represent the same and the one and the same thing. One of there are different styles of writing. There's a simplistic writing where you try to just be simple. And there's the other types of writing where you are bringing in diversity of words to make your work look sophisticated. The thing in writing skill is try not, we in our teachings, we try to make it simple and easy. But when you're writing, try not to also oversimplify it. Make it simple, but don't oversimplify it. So at least you're going to add a little bit of mysticism to your research process. It makes people also to respect you a little bit. Take it for example, if everybody knows that this thing is affordable, I mean, nobody's going to put value on it, right? But if you add a price tag to it and then raise it up a little bit, so that's what we're trying. That's what we did in this particular place. But to answer you directly, yes, they mean one and the same thing. It was just a style of writing that we, decided to just throw in to just bring in some air of mysticism into the whole process.
Thank you. Yeah.
No problem.
Okay, thank you for your question, Dr. Paul.
Yeah.
Any other questions on the Prisma diagram? Let's remember this is an interactive meeting. It's not a lecture section. So, okay. Here the inclusion and exclusion criteria was explicitly stated. So you know that, okay, this is the reason, or these are the reasons for papers that were included in these studies, or for papers that were excluded from this study. And then they went on to the review in proper, where they discussed extensively these papers that we see here, 109 papers that have been screened in as part of the records or reports that they want to review. And this formed the body of the literature or literature review. And then they let us know the knowledge gap, or starting with current knowledge first, explore the knowledge gap, gave us the updated information. And then here we can see historical background. So they were telling a story, basically, like we said, just it was more systematic. And then we were able to flow with their thought process. And then they included pictures to help us. And then there is a conclusion here. And then also bringing out important findings from the research or from the review that they've had, things like what they can do or what we can do as medical professionals to improve resilience, and then educational outcomes with people that have autism spectrum and with ADHD. So this paper is just a typical example of what you do in a systematic review paper. I hope that clarifies the literature review, systematic review, and a scoping review. If this paper were to be a meta-analysis, for example, it would basically be the same thing, but they will likely have focused on papers that would have very similar ideas to make their conclusion more, I don't want to use the word authentic, but something along that line, something more realistic to their research question or the research problem they're trying to solve.
There's something I just sent into the group where go back to the discussion of the paper. How you form discussion. There was one of our scientific sessions where we discussed on how to write a paper, right? When you arrive at your papers that you're including, probably 20, maybe 30, we usually tell people to try and do your inclusion and exclusion criteria so you can minimize your papers to like 20 to be easier to review, except you're lots of authors like here, we're like over like 10. So we divided it amongst ourselves. But if you're reviewing it alone, which we encourage people to do, just do like 2015. That's also, it's also okay. It's also acceptable to do that. And then you see in the group, in the WhatsApp group, you see how we broke it down into when you pick a paper, what you look at the paper and how you summarize the paper. So you're basically trying to create a story from summaries of 109. That story that you're trying to create is addressing the objective of the paper, right? You're not creating a story to address something else. You're looking at why, we're looking at how does people who have ADHD and autism, and how does resilience affect them subsequently in life. And that was, so when we're looking at this, when you're looking at that paper, this is my objective, looking at, okay, this child has, or this group has ADHD and autism combined, and then we're exposed to various resilience or various factors, and then what was your outcome, tracking them over a period. What did author A say about this entity? How did he come about his conclusion? Why did he do the why? First of all, we start with the why. Why did he do the paper? What did he find? And how did he come about his conclusion? That is our analysis on that paper. And then we keep replicating this same process for all the papers. And then also in between, we're trying to correlate and tie ideas. Author A agreed with author B, author A disagreed with author B. And then when you're writing it, you find out you're going to see subtopics in the whole process. So you try to structure your paper and make it easier to read, create subtitles. That's part of research planning that we're talking about in that first lecture that we had. If you don't watch that video, you go and watch it. It's going to help you a lot. So when you create subtitles, it's easier to write. 2 or 3 paragraphs. It's usually recommended for discussion, and it should be home and dry. How long does it take to write a literature review, Dr. Quinn? You've had experience in this.
Well, for systematic review, some people can use 4 months, but in my experience, it took us about 7 to 8 months, because it was an extensive list of paper we worked on. From the database alone, we had about 415 papers. And then it was still not enough. The knowledge we got from the papers were not enough. We still identified more gaps that needed to be closed, especially with countries like Canada, where you don't see all the information out there. So we had to reach out to organizations in Canada to help us with information, and started putting in some tools together. However, you need to realize that even when you do your research paper, there will still be limitations. So you need to be open about your limitations. And then if it's necessary, create a section for that in your paper and say that you did what you can to gather as much information, but there was still problems, or you still had difficulties identifying a particular aspect. So.
Now,
Okay.
Dr. Finn, now that you've taken us to this far, what's your conclusion? Where do we go from here?
So that's the next thing in our slide. We are concluding. Today, we've had a bird's eye view discussion on review papers generally, and we touched on the narrative of the review papers. We talked about the literature review. We talked about the systematic review, scoping review, and a little bit of meta-analysis. We've talked about processes to achieve any of these if we decide to do one or the other. However, in general, literature review papers tend to identify research problems or gaps. They expose current knowledge, trends, patterns. They try to update information and evidence. We draw conclusions. And then where necessary, we recommend solutions and areas for future research.
Thank you so much, Dr. Quinn. We really, really appreciate it. I want to see that. Thank you, Doug. It looks very beautiful. And then what's the next?
Thank you. I don't know if anyone has any more questions, so that Dr. Edward and Dr. Endurance can help.
Yeah, before they ask questions, so there's also something that we also didn't mention, or probably we mentioned in passing. When you want to do a prospective study, for example, when you want to look at something moving forward, one of your first steps is to do a literature review. Why? Because you want to find out what is the knowledge currently about this thing that I want to do in the future, right? I mean, where is the world at now? Where is the moon relative to my knowledge? So that you don't begin to do a research prospectively on something that has already been settled in the past, right? It's already been settled that to breathe makes me alive. So why do you want to do a research on it? Yeah, you can do a research on anything, but for me to do a research on breathing and how it makes me alive, I need to figure out what are the recommendations, where is the world, because the world is rapidly changing in cardiovascular system, in whatever, everything is rapidly changing, knowledge is changing. And then if you want to study behavior, or study patterns, or study something, or propose a theory, you need to figure out what is the existing theory first. And that is what brings you to do either a scoping review, literature review, or meta-analysis. And then you figure out, okay, this is where we are. Then you go ahead and now say, okay, based on where we are, these are the gaps that we identified. We're going to move forward and do this prospective, or is it prospective design? So that's another very great reason to do literature review. Not to scare anyone. You can do a good literature review in 3 days, really, because the world has really advanced. I'm one of the proponents of using softwares and AIs and advancements to do literature review, like Dr. Quinn has mentioned. A lot of softwares are going to help you. Gone are the days where you now begin to search the internet one to an analog. You pull the extensions into your search drive or your ad bar. You put those extensions. There's one of them. Trying to remember the, I'll remember the name before we go. Once you put it in, you just say, hey, generate papers, blah, 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 blah. It's going to search through all the database and generate all free papers for you. Probably it's going to generate like 50,000, 100,000. And then you say, limit it to 5, and then they will limit it to 5. Many of those softwares are paid versions. But you could do it in 3 days or 5 days. And you mustn't review 50 papers. You could review only 5 papers and then publish it. But you just disclose that I reviewed 5 papers and the reason why you reviewed 5 papers. And then you publish it. You start from somewhere, and then someday you get to where you're going to review 500 papers, and you go from there. Is there a law that will say, hey, it must be 20, it must be 50? No, there's no law like that. There's no rule like that. The only thing is that the publishers have their various rules or various guidelines on papers that they accept. So you look for a paper that's going to accept 5 review topics or 5 review journals, and then you go with them. That's where we come in as IMG Research Academy, because we've been experiencing all the loops and the turns, and we could recommend papers, publishers that could take 500 review papers, and publishers that will not take anything less than 50 review papers. I will say, hey, if you're going to submit to this journal, they're not going to accept this paper because the number of review papers are very, very, very small. Thank you, Dr. Quinn. Interesting discussion. We'll leave questions and answers. If you have anyone, if you don't have any, we're on top of the hour. In 5 minutes, we'll be closing so that we can respect your time. We're here as a group. How to join us? If you have friends who can benefit from our group, refer them to join us. The guidelines on how to join is in the group. They have to be scientists looking to advance their career in either Canada, US, or UK. Majorly medical doctors. So just reach out to me, reach out to Endurance, reach out to any of the admins, and then they will have a conversation with you on what it is to join us, and then we add you. Just a point of note that we only take referrals. We don't take like strange people, because of a lot of things are happening on the spheres of life. People trying to hack into you and then also hack into your members. So we're being very, very cautious on who we admit into our group. I'll be ending the recording now so we can go into the general session, make some few announcements. Dr. Quinn, hang in there in case there are questions that are coming up. We'll see you same time next year because we're going on break. December is a time for holiday, not a time for research. That's what, like my wife usually say, it's time for vacation. So we're planning to take trips and not time for research. But other activities that we do, our consulting activities will continue. Support activities will continue, but our lectures and our scientific sessions will come to an end. And then we'll return back the second week of February, where we'll continue our teaching series and we'll roll the teaching series all the way to during the application times, October, November, December, like we usually do. Thank you so much, everyone. Any questions you could drop while we stop the recording?